He doesn't belong here. The words cut through the quiet cabin of first class like a blade. In an instant, every gaze on Aurora Air, Flight 117, turned toward the same direction, Seat 2A. Dr. Malcolm Reed looked up. He said nothing. He simply looked, his eyes calm and deep like a winter lake, yet cold enough to make anyone meeting them uneasy. Catherine Whitmore, the woman who had just spoken, stood tall beside him. At 55, she carried the effortless poise of someone born into privilege, her blonde hair curled to perfection, her cream-colored suit expensive, and her expression that of a person used to having the world revolve around her. Her manicured hand gripped the armrest of Malcolm's seat as if it were her own territory. The air grew thick-heavy with the scent of luxury perfume and unspoken tension. Nearby flight attendant Noah Grant, barely in his 20s, hesitated, torn between fear of being wrong and fear of offending a VIP. His eyes flicked nervously between them, then seeking refuge in safety, he chose silence. Malcolm still didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence alone was louder than any protest. A soft chime sounded. Catherine pressed the call button with the same diamond-ringed finger that had pointed toward him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice syrupy sweet but sharp. "Underneath, I believe there's been a mix-up with the seating." Chief Flight Attendant Stephanie Cho approached with a professional smile, but in her eyes lingered the quiet dread of someone about to handle a sensitive situation. "Mrs. Whitmore? What seems to be the problem?" Catherine tilted her head slightly, gesturing toward Malcolm with the tip of a metal pen. "This gentleman, I believe there's been some mistake. This is first class, and I just want to make sure everything is according to policy." A long silence followed. The steady hum of the engines filled the gap. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow across Malcolm's face, composed, steady, not a trace of anger. Sir Stephanie turned toward him. "May I see your ticket?" "Please." Malcolm nodded, taking out his phone from his vest pocket and opening the boarding pass. 2A first class, Malcolm Reed. Everything was perfectly in order. Stephanie checked carefully. She knew it was valid, yet she still asked, with forced calm, "Did you book this ticket yourself, sir?" The harmless-sounding question landed like a slap in mid-air. Malcolm tilted his head slightly. Who else would have booked it? "Oh, I just meant. Sometimes the system makes mistakes." "There is no mistake," he replied softly, almost in a whisper. "This is my seat." But she was already turning away, leaning toward Noah to whisper something. Their hushed words and averted eyes said everything they wouldn't dare speak aloud. Catherine settled into the seat across the aisle, pretending to focus on her tablet, but the faint smile tugging at her lips betrayed her victory. The first-class cabin, usually filled only with the soft clicks of champagne glasses and magazine pages, now felt suffocating. People didn't stare outright. They only glanced just enough to understand what was happening. No one spoke, but everyone knew the black man in seat 2A was the anomaly. Malcolm could feel every gaze, every whisper. He had lived this scene before, in boardrooms, at elegant galas, even on flights he himself had financed. But today was different. He wasn't just being judged. He was witnessing a test of the very system he once believed in. He placed both hands on the folding tray, inhaled deeply, and counted his breaths. Calm. That was the one thing he had never lost. Noah returned this time with Stephanie beside him, tablet in hand. Their smiles were rehearsed, their eyes cautious. "Mr. Vröjash," Reed Stephanie began, "we just need to verify a few small details to ensure there are no errors before takeoff. Verify what exactly? Just standard protocol, your ticket, your identity routine checks, she said. Standard for whom? Malcolm asked. The question froze the air around them. Noah's eyes dropped to the screen, pretending to read. Catherine's lips curved into a delicate smile, the satisfaction of someone whose power had just been confirmed. Malcolm leaned back in his seat, his voice steady and low. I've done everything right. Checked in online, boarded the correct seat, valid ticket. The only thing wrong here is the way you're looking at me. No one answered. The only sound left was the tapping of Catherine's keyboard and the faint click of Stephanie's earpiece as she murmured into it. We'll confirm with the gate, just a few minutes. Malcolm turned his gaze toward the window. On the runway, sunlight stretched across the tarmac as planes took off one by one. His, however, remained still, held hostage by a single absurd question. Does he really belong here? A chill traced his spine. He was no longer angry, just tired. Tired of the repetition of a script he knew by heart, people assuming he was wrong, then trying to prove it no matter how. A man from a few rows back whispered, "What's going on up there?" Someone else replied softly, "Probably a mix-up. Those types always have trouble." Those types. The words landed like lead. Malcolm closed his eyes not to escape, but to feel it fully, the cold seeping through the fabric of his tailored suit, the silence of those who watched but said nothing. Catherine adjusted her scarf and said, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "I don't want trouble, but situations like this really should be clarified before we take off." Her tone was smooth, polite, and merciless. "Of course, ma'am," Noah replied. The cockpit door opened. A figure in a crisp captain's uniform stepped out and walked down the aisle with slow, deliberate authority. The rhythmic click of Captain Laura Bennett's heels echoed across the carpet. No one spoke. All eyes followed her, the person who would decide the fate of Seat 2A. Malcolm opened his eyes, meeting her gaze head-on. No fear, no retreat. She stopped before him, her voice calm and measured. "I was told there's some confusion about seating." "There's no confusion," Malcolm said, his voice deep and certain. Catherine smiled again, convinced she had won. But she didn't know. In that very moment, the man in Seat 2A was memorizing every face, every word, every breath in that cabin, as if he already knew this wouldn't end here. And indeed it wouldn't. The air inside the first-class cabin of Aurora Air Flight 117 was so thick you could almost hear your own heartbeat. Flight Attendant Noah Grant and Chief Attendant Stephanie Cho stood side by side like two cadets waiting for orders. In front of them, Captain Laura Bennett tilted her tablet slightly, her eyes scanning meaningless lines of data, because what needed to be verified was never on a screen. Mr. Reed Laura began her voice, controlled but tense. "We just need to confirm a few details with the system. It's standard procedure." Malcolm looked up, his gaze sharp, but not hostile. "Procedure for whom, Captain?" The question made Laura pause. She pressed her lips together, then replied in the tone people call professional. "For all passengers, of course." "Then what about seats 2B, 2C, and 2D?" Malcolm asked, his eyes steady, unwavering. No one answered. From the rows behind, some passengers glanced up, others pretended to scroll through their phones. But no one missed this moment. The man in seat 2, a calm, composed, impeccably dressed, was breaking an invisible order everyone had quietly accepted, the unspoken rule of who gets to question and who must prove they belong. Laura took a breath. "Please, sir, cooperate so we can avoid any misunderstanding." "I have cooperated," Malcolm said evenly. I provided my ticket, my name, and confirmed my seat. We just want to be certain. Malcolm nodded slightly. So do I, Captain. I just want to be certain that your certainty doesn't come from the colour of my skin. The words froze the air. Catherine Whitmore turned her head and let out a sharp, brittle laugh. That's absurd, she muttered, just loud enough for 2 rows to hear. No one mentioned skin colour. Then why am I the only one being questioned? Malcolm replied softly. It wasn't a question anymore, it was a verdict. Laura shifted her gaze to Stephanie, silently signalling her to proceed. The chief attendant bowed slightly and spoke in a low, cautious tone. Sir, if you could please step out of the cabin for a moment, we'll verify everything quickly. Malcolm looked at her. His calmness was so absolute, it was almost frightening. No. One word. Firm, heavy landing on the floor like a stone. Noah swallowed hard. He had never seen anyone refuse like that, not in first class. Catherine shook her head, pressing harder on her tablet screen, as if annoyed by someone causing trouble. You're delaying the flight, she said sharply. Malcolm turned to her, his voice low but resonant, every syllable clear. No, ma'am. I'm not delaying this flight. It's the way you're treating me that's holding it back. His words made a few passengers look up. A man wearing a silver watch in row 3 muttered, If there's a problem, solve it quickly, we have to get to Seattle. Malcolm turned his head toward him, his gaze steady, not angry, just honest. Where exactly is the problem, sir? With me or with your assumptions about me? No one responded. Laura exhaled quietly, took a step back and spoke into her headset. Contact ground security. Verify passenger 2A. Noah nodded. Yes, Captain. For the next few minutes, the cabin fell completely silent. Malcolm said nothing. He opened his iPad pretending to read, but in truth, he was taking notes, observations of glances, tones, word choices, collective reactions. He had lived through moments like this many times before, in other rooms, in other places. But this was the first time it happened on an airline he had founded himself. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. Disappointed by the calm indifference of those around him, the ones who chose silence, because silence was easier than justice. Catherine crossed her legs, adjusting the diamond-encrusted watch on her wrist. I've flown with Aurora Air for 10 years, she said, her voice clear enough to carry, and I've never seen a passenger make things so difficult. Malcolm looked up, his tone, deep, steady. Maybe that's because you've never seen staff make things this difficult for a passenger like me. Catherine froze, then smirked, eyes glinting with disdain. You're only embarrassing yourself, maybe Malcolm replied, but at least I'm not embarrassed to ask for respect. The words made Noah instinctively lower his head. For a fleeting moment, he remembered his first day at training, when the instructor had said, Your job is to make every passenger feel welcome. And now he was doing the opposite. Laura stepped forward again, her earpiece crackling with feedback. The system can't verify your ticket code, possibly a network error, she said. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, his eyes cold. Or maybe a bias error. No one spoke. Laura clenched her hand to steady her tone. Mr. Reed, if you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to do what? Malcolm interrupted softly. Call security. Remove me from my own seat. Or maybe just prove that Aurora Air, the airline I founded, still hasn't learned what dignity means. His words struck like lightning. Catherine's head snapped up. What did you just say? Malcolm didn't answer. He looked straight at Laura, and for the first time, she felt something shift, a realization that the man in front of her might not be just another passenger. Before she could respond, Noah spoke, his voice trembling slightly. "Captain, should we check with operations again?" Laura frowned. "I already gave the order to verify. I just worry we might be making a mistake." "That's enough, Noah." Her tone hardened. Malcolm turned to the young man, his expression softening. In his eyes, Noah saw a flicker of something human, a spark of conscience still alive in this cabin. Then Malcolm turned back toward the window, where sunlight reflected his face in two halves, one calm, one weary. Outside, other planes were taking off engines, roaring, slicing through the wind. Freedom, that sound of movement, was what he had always believed everyone deserved. And yet here, he sat held back because someone decided he didn't belong. Laura rested her hand on the seat in front of him, lowering her voice. "Mr. Reed, if you just cooperate, this will all go faster." Malcolm didn't look up. "I already have. I'm just refusing to bow." Laura's tone sharpened. "If you don't leave this cabin now, I'll then do it." Malcolm interrupted softly, like an exhale. "But before you do, I suggest you call your supervisor. Because when the truth comes out, the one being verified won't be me." Silence fell over first class. Catherine went still. Noah held his breath. Stephanie looked down. Laura stood upright, hiding the slight tremor in her hand. 1 minute. 2 minutes. No one spoke. The only sound was the deep hum of the engines, steady and low, like the heartbeat of an approaching storm. In seat 2, Malcolm quietly switched on his phone's camera, the red light blinking. He was no longer just a passenger. He had become a witness to the truth he was about to expose. And across the aisle, Catherine Whitmore still didn't realize this storm wasn't coming for him. It was about to sweep away the entire world she thought was safe. "Mr. Reed, I need you to step outside, right now." Captain Laura Bennett's voice was hard, each syllable dropping into the hush, like the strike of a cold hammer. Malcolm Reed looked up, his gaze unwavering. He spoke softly, only 3 words, "No." "I'm staying." First class held its breath. In that air that no was not merely a refusal of a request, it was a defiance of an order hidden in plain sight, the unspoken order that says power and prejudice may command the truth. Stephanie Cho glanced at Noah Grant, her eyes silently asking for help. But the young attendant stood, frozen hands clenched around the safety checklist, his face as if bound by silence. Catherine Whitmore gave a small laugh, sweet and sour as vinegar. Ridiculous. If he would just cooperate, this flight would have taken off already. Malcolm turned, meeting her gaze. "I do not cooperate with disrespect, Mrs. Whitmore." The words were gentle as a breeze, yet enough to knock Catherine off balance. She sprang to her feet, an expensive silk scarf slipping to the floor. "How dare you accuse me of disrespect? I'm only asking for clear procedure." Malcolm remained composed, eyes never leaving hers, and that clear procedure only began the moment I sat in this seat, didn't it? Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Laura stepped in, a trace of fatigue in her voice. "All right, both of you, let's calm down. Mr. Reed, this isn't personal. I just need to ensure every passenger is comfortable." Malcolm tilted his head, a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. "How interesting. I am a passenger too, Captain. Why is no one concerned about my comfort?" The question made Stephanie's heart tighten. For the first time, she felt she might be standing on the wrong side. Laura exhaled hard, then looked to Noah. "Call ground security. Tell them to prepare to assist." Her voice moved through the headset, cold and mechanical. Malcolm looked out the window. Sunlight had fully climbed. On the runway, another aircraft rolled forward and slipped away smoothly free and quiet the way this flight should have been. He inhaled deeply. A chill edged into his chest with a familiar weariness, the memory of how many times he had had to prove he had the right to be where he belonged. He knew this too well, but today he no longer wished to be silent. Without a word, Malcolm took out his phone and switched on the camera. A small red light pulsed on the screen. He set it on the tray table lens facing forward. No warning, no declaration, just a small movement, and it tipped the room off its axis. Noah blurted, "You're recording, yes?" Malcolm said. "Recording the truth. Everyone deserves to see this." Laura frowned, her tone sharpening. "You are not permitted to film inside the cabin without the crew's consent. And you are not permitted to question my identity without cause." The answer stopped Laura cold. For an instant she looked unsettled, the first flicker of awareness that she was being recorded, on the thin line between right and wrong. Catherine slapped a palm lightly against her seat. "I will not be part of this cheap spectacle. It's shameful." Malcolm turned back, his voice low and even a melody that needed no crescendo. "No, ma'am. This is not a spectacle. This is reality." Colour rose to Catherine's face, anger flaring in her eyes. But she kept silent, because somewhere deep inside, something had shifted, a loss of control she could feel, but not name. Laura leaned in and lowered her voice. "Mr. Reed, I am trying to help you. If you cooperate, this will be quick. Help me." Malcolm's mouth tightened. "I don't need help. I need respect." The cabin was so quiet you could hear a seatbelt click as someone shifted. Every gaze was a strung wire. No one breathed too loudly, afraid to snap the heavy stillness. Laura pressed the cabin call, her voice carrying through the headset. "Captain to flight deck, prepare for a security intervention." Meanwhile, Malcolm kept his eyes on the sky beyond the window, a blue expanse stretching without end. He thought of why he was flying under the radar in the first place, to learn what the passenger experience truly was. Now he knew more painfully than expected. A beep sounded in Laura's ear. A deep voice from the ground came through. Verification still incomplete, possibly a system error. "We're checking further." Checking further. Malcolm repeated his tone, calm, while his eyes cut like a blade. "How long until your bias stops being a system error?" No one answered. Stephanie stared down, thumb circling a slim silver ring. In her head a voice rose. "This is not right. The way we are doing this is not right." Yet she did not speak. Silence like all the other times. Malcolm watched. He read every expression from Catherine's polished smile to Noah's frightened eyes to Laura's rigid mask. They were all trapped by the same thing, fear of admitting they were wrong. "Mr. Reed," Laura said, the steadiness seeping out of her voice. "If you continue like this, I will have to call security onto the aircraft." Malcolm set his stylus down, his voice low and precise. "Then do it. But before you call, I suggest you remember my name and make sure you spell it correctly, because it will appear in every news report when this goes public." Laura faltered. In that moment, she understood that this man was not afraid, and that frightened her instead. Catherine sprang up again. "I refuse to share a flight with this troublemaker. Captain, call security now." Troublemaker Malcolm echoed, eyes still forward. "I am sitting still. I am not shouting. I am not resisting. If silence and having dark skin now count as trouble, perhaps this plane does not need to take off at all." A murmur rose from the rows behind. "He has a point," someone whispered. But Catherine snapped back. No one asked for your opinion. Laura raised a hand. Enough. Everyone maintain order. Then she turned to Malcolm, her gaze a knot of anger and confusion. Do you truly want this to go that far? Malcolm inclined his head. No, I do not. But sometimes the truth must be seen, so the world remembers it still exists. He looked down at the phone, the red light still blinking. It was not anger, it was evidence being captured, every word, every glance, every moment. Laura drew a long breath and signaled to Stephanie. Call security. Stephanie nodded, faintly dialed, and spoke with a tremor copy. Catherine dropped back into her seat, lips curling into a victorious smile. Finally she said, Order will be restored. Malcolm turned his voice, low, deep, and cold. No, ma'am. This order is about to be rewritten. First class fell into a strange quiet. Sunlight poured through the window and split Malcolm's face in two, one half, bright the other in shadow. In the back, Noah saw it and understood the man was not merely guarding a seat, he was standing up for what was right, the very thing they had all ignored for far too long. Outside, a security vehicle was drawing up alongside the plane. Inside, the red light kept blinking. And in that exact moment, everyone knew this would never again be called a mere incident. It would be the beginning of a storm, named Justice. The cockpit door swung open. High heels thudded softly against the thick carpet of first class. Each step Captain Laura Bennett took carried the authority of someone holding the fate of 100 passengers, yet this time that authority trembled. She stopped at row 2A. Dr. Malcolm Reed sat there, spine straight, gaze so calm it was frightening. Beside him, his phone screen glowed. The red light blinked silent, yet more threatening than any words. Mr. Reed, Laura said, trying to keep her composure. I understand there has been a misunderstanding, but we need to re-verify information to ensure every passenger is comfortable before takeoff. Comfort, Malcolm echoed his voice, low, almost a strangled laugh. You speak as if the comfort of everyone can be achieved by humiliating one person. The air thickened, every eye fixed on them, some curious, some expectant, some impatient for it to end, so the plane could leave. Across the aisle, Catherine Whitmore tilted her head, her tone smooth. Captain Bennett, I have flown with Aurora Air for more than 10 years. I have never seen such unprofessional behavior. We just want clarity, that is all. Laura turned to her and tried to nod. I understand, Mrs. Whitmore. I am handling it. Malcolm looked at the two women, one speaking in the name of procedure, the other in the name of privilege, and he understood that in their eyes he had never been a customer. He was a situation to be handled. Captain, he said slowly, my ticket is valid. I checked in online, past security, past the gate, and sat in my assigned seat, yet, because someone decided I did not look appropriate, you chose to doubt everything I did right. Laura held a smile as thin as a blade. We are only following safety procedures. Safe for whom? Malcolm asked, his eyes never leaving hers. The question rocked Laura. Her chest tightened. In all her years of flying and dealing with difficult passengers, she had never seen eyes like his. Not angry, not afraid, only filled with disappointment. From the rows behind, soft murmurs rose. A man with a silver watch said, under his breath, If there is a problem, solve it quickly. We have a meeting. The woman beside him nodded. Exactly. Do not let one person affect the entire flight. Malcolm did not turn, but he heard them clearly. Exactly, he said. Do not let one person affect the entire flight, especially when that person is the one who refuses to face their own bias. Laura gripped her tablet. You are insulting my crew." "No," he answered gently. "I am speaking the truth you are trying to avoid." The cabin fell silent. Stephanie Cho lowered her head, trying to hide the tears welling in her eyes. She remembered first seeing Malcolm in the VIP lounge, not recognizing him, only seeing him help an elderly passenger fasten a belt. She had thought him kind. Now, standing between him and the system she served, she felt unbearably small. Catherine suddenly spoke, as if to seize back control. "I want to emphasize that I am biased against no one, but clearly this is inconveniencing all of us. If he truly has a ticket, why not prove it again, so everyone can feel at ease?" Malcolm turned and looked straight at her, his voice low and firm. "You speak as if truth only has value when it soothes you. Truth does not need your permission." Color rushed into Catherine's face. "You," Malcolm raised a hand, cutting her off. "Enough." "You have said plenty," Laura interjected, trying to contain the situation. "All right, tensions are high. Mr. Reed, please understand, we want everything to proceed smoothly. If you could step outside for a few minutes." No, Malcolm cut in his voice, still calm but carrying weight. "I will not stand up just to make someone else feel comfortable about their prejudice." Noah Grant, the youngest on the crew, stood motionless behind them, heart pounding. He wanted to say he is right, but his throat locked. Laura's patience began to fray. "You are causing a disturbance, and I will not let this escalate." Malcolm's mouth curved faintly. "You cannot stop what is escalating, Captain, because it is not me. It is the truth you are trying to smother." A brief hush settled. Laura turned and walked toward the front of the cabin, speaking quietly into her headset. "Contact operations. Situation in 2. A remains unresolved. Prepare to call security." Stephanie answered softly, her voice shaking. "Copy, Captain." Malcolm watched. Not anger, not fear. Only the look of someone who already knows the ending, yet chooses to see it through, because if he yielded today, thousands more would endure the same without a voice. He tapped his phone and adjusted the angle. The blinking red light reflected on the tray table like the glint of a silent verdict. "You are recording, are you?" Laura asked, her voice slipping out of control. "Yes," Malcolm replied, because people tend to behave correctly when they know someone is watching. A soft "oh" rose from row 4. A young woman lifted her phone and began recording. Another passenger followed. Laura looked around and understood this fight was no longer contained by a narrow cabin. It was being transmitted, witnessed, preserved, and if she misstepped, her career could end right here at an altitude that had yet to leave the ground. She tried to harden her tone. "Mr. Reed, if you do not leave your seat, I will be forced to call security. Things will only get worse." Malcolm smiled faintly and tilted his head. "Worse for whom, Captain? For me, the man suspected because of his skin, or for you, the person about to realize she is wrong?" For the first time, Laura was silent, not because she lacked words, but because she no longer believed her own argument. Inside her, what she called procedure suddenly felt as fragile as paper, and behind that paper was the face of a man forcing her to see a human being, not merely a passenger. A long pause. Then softly, Malcolm said, "You know, the hardest part is not being suspected. It is having to smile while being suspected, because if you push back, they say, 'See, he is out of control,' and if you stay quiet, they think he must be hiding something." Laura lowered her head, avoiding his gaze. She felt ashamed, an unfamiliar feeling for someone who had believed herself always fair. But Catherine, oblivious to this, cut in with a mocking tone. How dramatic. Captain, I do not have time for philosophy. We need to take off. Malcolm turned to her, his voice decisive, each word etched into the air. No, Mrs. Whitmore. This flight is not high enough to take off yet, because we are still stuck on the ground of prejudice. The cabin dropped into absolute silence. Noah looked at him, and for the first time in his life understood that calm can be stronger than command. Far off, a radio crackled a ground agent's voice, announcing, "Security team is boarding." Laura inhaled sharply, a flicker of despair in her eyes. Malcolm placed a hand on his phone, his voice low and steady. "Good. Let them come. Because it is time for more than Aurora air. It is time for the world to witness this, that sometimes, in the name of protecting the comfort of everyone, people will trample the dignity of one." And in the dim light of first class, the red beacon kept blinking like the heartbeat of a truth about to be born. A faint click sounded in Captain Laura Bennett's earpiece. "Security has been dispatched, Captain. 2 officers are on their way." The sterile voice echoed in her head, like the clink of handcuffs closing around her own wrists, because at that very moment, Laura knew she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. She turned to look at the passenger, in seat 2A. Dr. Malcolm Reed sat perfectly still, his back straight, his hands folded on his lap. His face was calm as a lake. No anger, no fear, only that gaze, quiet, steady and unflinching, the kind of gaze that came from someone who had lived through storms of prejudice and learned how to make them bow. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, "this is your last chance to cooperate. We just want to avoid making this a bigger issue." Malcolm looked her straight in the eyes. "You made it a bigger issue the moment you decided to doubt me." First class fell utterly silent. Morning sunlight filtered through the window, casting half of his face in brightness and the other in shadow. Everyone knew something was about to explode. Catherine Whitmore sipped her champagne and let out a small, detached laugh. Oh, please, if he had just stepped out from the start, we'd be in the air by now. People who refuse to listen don't belong in first class, a voice chimed in from row 3. Exactly. We paid to fly, not to watch a drama. Malcolm didn't turn around. His voice was calm but sharp as a blade. How interesting. When injustice happens, people see no problem. But the moment the one being disrespected refuses to stay silent suddenly, that's when it becomes inconvenient. His words sliced through the cabin like fire. Some passengers lowered their heads in shame, others turned away pretending to scroll through their phones, and a few glared in irritation, the kind of people who believed their silence made them neutral. Laura turned to Stephanie Cho, her voice tight. "Alert security when they reach the gate." Stephanie nodded faintly, but her hand trembled. She knew this was no longer procedure. It was a verdict, and she was standing on the wrong side of it. Meanwhile, Noah Grant stood quietly at the back of the cabin, his throat tight, wanting to speak, but too afraid of losing his job to find the courage. Malcolm looked at them. He didn't blame them. He understood. Fear was the common language of those who had lived too long inside systems that punished independent thought. He turned to Catherine, his tone even and cold. "Do you know what's most frightening, Mrs. Whitmore?" She raised an eyebrow, smirking. "What is it?" "It's when a person believes they have the right to decide who belongs and who doesn't, because that belief has made the world bleed more times than history can count." She laughed, raspy and dismissive. "You're comparing a seating issue to war. Don't be so dramatic. Malcolm tilted his head slightly. The problem, Mom, is that every war begins with a seat when someone is told you don't deserve to sit here. The words froze the air. Even Laura felt a chill down her spine. Just then, the intercom crackled with a message from the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, Aurora Air Flight 117 will be delayed due to a minor technical issue. Please remain calm. But no one believed the technical issue. Everyone knew exactly where the problem sat, row 2A. The man with the silver watch from the back spoke again, his tone cold. Captain, as a long-time customer, I suggest resolving this immediately. If he won't comply, remove him. Don't make 100 people suffer for one. A few voices murmured in agreement. Catherine smiled faintly. Laura nodded slightly, as if the agreement were the justification she needed to make her choice seem right. Malcolm turned, sweeping his gaze across them. It's easy to choose sides when the side you choose makes you feel right, he said. But don't forget, when you stay silent or agree, you become part of the wrong you're watching. Catherine rolled her eyes. Oh, please, another moral lecture. No, Malcolm replied. That's not a lecture. It's the truth. And the truth doesn't need applause. A young woman in row 4 raised her phone, secretly recording. Her eyes glimmered, as if she realized she was witnessing something far bigger than a minor dispute. Laura drew a deep breath. All right, she said. If you refuse to cooperate, I will have to call security on board. Malcolm nodded once. Go ahead. At that moment, Catherine leaned back in her seat, lips curling into a victorious smile. But Laura, though trying to appear certain, felt something collapse inside her. Minutes later, a radio crackled in the aisle. Security's here. 2 uniformed officers entered firm stance, scanning eyes. One of them, Sergeant Mark Alvarez, looked seasoned, steady, perceptive. Captain, what's the situation? He asked. Laura gestured toward Malcolm. This passenger refused to comply with crew instructions and has shown signs of resistance. Malcolm lifted his head, his voice calm and low. I am sitting in my assigned seat, asking only to be treated fairly. Mark looked at him, then at the phone still recording. His eyes shifted, the suspicion fading into something else, curiosity, concern. So may I see your ticket? Malcolm unlocked his phone and held out the boarding pass. Dr. Malcolm Reed, seat 2A confirmed. Mark stared for a few seconds, then turned to Laura. The ticket is completely valid. The air cracked like a taut string snapping. Catherine leapt to her feet. Then what about all this commotion? Someone has to take responsibility. Malcolm met her eyes. You're looking at the one responsible, ma'am, just not the one you think. Laura stepped forward, her face pale. She knew everything was slipping out of control. Sergeant Alvarez, follow procedure. Escort the passenger off the plane. Mark frowned slightly but stepped forward. Mr. Reed, I have to ask you to leave the aircraft. Malcolm reached slowly into his wallet and pulled out a business card. He held it up so the light caught the silver print. Dr. Malcolm Reed, CEO and co-founder Aurora Air. The cabin erupted into stunned silence. Noah's eyes widened. Stephanie's mouth fell open. Catherine froze like a statue. Laura stood paralyzed. Malcolm spoke quietly, his voice soft as air, yet each word weighed heavy in the room. Before you do that, Sergeant, you might want to call Erin Cole, the current CEO of Aurora Air. Ask her if removing the co-founder of his own airline is part of company procedure. Mark tightened his grip on the card, heart pounding. He looked at Laura, whose face had gone white as paper. Catherine stammered, That's impossible, he can't be. Malcolm turned to her, smiling. You're right about one thing, Mrs. Whitmore. I don't belong here. I belong above it." First class fell into a silence so deep it was almost sacred, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm truly begins. Outside sunlight streamed through the windows, reflecting off the shimmering Aurora Air logo, a mirror image of an airline now forced to face the very soul it had forgotten. The entire first-class cabin of Aurora Air Flight 117 fell silent. No more whispers, no more impatient sighs, only the steady hum of the engines, waiting for clearance to take off like the heartbeat of something enormous being held inside a collective chest. Captain Laura Bennett stood frozen, her lips parted, but no words came out. Inside her mind, protocols, manuals, and behavior guidelines scattered like loose papers caught in a storm. Everything she had believed to be right was collapsing before her eyes, all because of a small silver business card. Dr. Malcolm Reed still sat calmly in seat 2A, as if he were in his own home. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to prove anything else. His name alone, the name of the founder of Aurora Air, rendered every justification meaningless. "You wanted me off this plane," he said slowly, his deep voice steady, "because you thought I didn't belong here. But I built this place, every seat, every policy, every promise that said respect for all passengers. And today you've shown me that the very system I created has forgotten its soul." His words struck Laura like a slap. She tried to speak, but her voice trembled. "I didn't know." Not knowing, Malcolm interrupted, is the reason prejudice survives. Because people keep saying they don't know and think that makes them innocent. Behind him, Catherine Whitmore stammered, "That's impossible, you're lying. The real CEO is Erin Cole. I read it in the news." Malcolm turned toward her, calm and steady. "She's the operating CEO. I'm the co-founder, the one who wrote the policies she enforces. But perhaps you've forgotten sometimes the creator has to reform what they built." Catherine's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to keep her tone sharp. "Whoever you are, your behavior is still inappropriate. You're disturbing everyone." Disturbing Malcolm tilted his head. Justice always disturbs those who are too comfortable in their privilege. The cabin fell into deep silence, every eye locked on the man in seat 2A. He was no longer the disruptive passenger. He was the mirror forcing everyone else to see themselves. Then from the very back of first class, a deep male voice broke the silence. His right, heads turned. A middle-aged black man in a grey suit stood slowly. "I've been watching this from the start. He hasn't done anything wrong." Andre Lewis, attorney and long-time Aurora Air customer, took a step forward. His voice was clear and calm, not loud, but carrying the unmistakable weight of truth. He showed his ticket, his identification, and sat in his assigned seat. "And all of you, you doubted him, mocked him, and demanded verification for no reason. If he weren't the founder of this airline who would have defended him from that kind of treatment," Laura stiffened. The entire cabin turned to Andre, as if waiting for someone to finally say what they couldn't. Catherine sneered, her tone dripping with contempt. Of course he'd defend him. They're on the same side. Andre turned to her, his eyes sharp as steel. The same side. He took another step forward, his voice rising. "Do you realize what you just said? You admitted that in your eyes, skin color is already a side." The cabin went utterly still. Catherine opened her mouth but couldn't find words. Andre turned to Laura. "Captain Bennett, I'm an attorney with the Civil Rights Association. If you forcibly remove Mr. Reed without lawful cause, you won't just lose your job. Aurora Air will face a public discrimination lawsuit, and I'll be the one leading it." Laura took a sharp breath. Her heart pounded. She looked around. Stephanie Cho kept her head bowed, tears silently falling. Noah Grant stared at her eyes, pleading, begging her not to make another mistake. At the cabin door, 2 security officers stepped in, Sergeant Mark Alvarez and his partner. The air felt dense as smoke. "What's going on here?" Mark asked. Laura straightened slightly, trying to steady herself. Just a passenger refusing to cooperate. Malcolm looked directly at the officer, slid the business card from the tray, and pushed it toward him. "Before you do anything, read this." Mark took the card and read every word slowly. "Dr. Malcolm Reed, CEO and co-founder, Aurora Air." His eyes widened. He looked back at Malcolm, then at Laura, whose face was pale sweat glistening on her forehead. "You said this passenger was non-compliant." Laura's lips trembled. "I didn't know, and you didn't think to find out." Before calling us up here, Mark's voice was low, but cut through the air like a blade. Catherine shot to her feet, trying to regain control. "He's using his position to intimidate everyone. This is abuse of power." Malcolm turned to her, his tone calm but as sharp as steel. "No, Mrs. Whitmore, I don't need to intimidate anyone. I simply let people reveal who they truly are." A young woman in row 4 whispered, "I recorded everything." Another nodded. So did I. Little red lights blinked across the cabin phone's camera's evidence. Mark pressed his earpiece. Confirming crew misconduct, likely. Suspend removal order. Contact headquarters. Laura nearly collapsed. She knew it was over. Malcolm leaned back slightly, his voice low but clear. "Captain Bennett, I don't need an apology. I need you to see how this system reacts to someone who doesn't fit its mold." Then he turned to Mark. "You can call Erin Cole, CEO of Aurora Air. Ask her what's happening on her plane." Mark immediately made the call. 3 rings. Then a strong female voice came through the speaker. "This is Erin Cole." "What's going on?" Mark spoke, briefly. A pause followed. Then Erin's voice sharpened. "Put Dr. Reed on." Laura froze. Malcolm took the phone, his voice steady and composed. "Erin, I've just finished our undercover assessment." Silence for a moment. Then Erin asked, and Malcolm answered softly. The system failed. Completely. The cabin was still as stone. Erin's voice came through again, lower but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Maintain the scene. The flight is suspended. The crew is to be temporarily relieved pending investigation. I'll handle this personally. Hand the phone back to the captain." Malcolm passed the phone to Laura. Her hands trembled as she took it. Erin's voice carried through the cabin. "Captain Bennett, Mr. Reed is the co-founder of this airline. You've just violated our core policy, dignity for all. I expect your full cooperation. No debate, no excuses. Mr. Reed is now in charge of the cabin until I arrive." The phone slipped from Laura's fingers and hit the floor with a sharp, hollow sound. Malcolm looked around the cabin, his tone low and steady. "As of this moment, Aurora Air Flight 117 is suspended. The crew will leave the cabin for investigation. And Mrs. Whitmore," he paused, eyes locking on hers, "you are permanently banned from flying on our airline." Catherine shot up, shouting, "You can't do this, I'll sue you." Malcolm tilted his head, his voice soft as wind. "No, you won't. Because from this moment on, the power you thought you had no longer belongs to you." A silent gust seemed to sweep through the cabin, carrying away all traces of arrogance, prejudice, and the illusion of control. Aurora Air Flight 117 had not yet taken off, but justice had just landed. No human voices remained, only the hiss of wind outside, and the pale noon light pouring through the windows of a motionless aircraft on the runway. In the first-class cabin of Aurora, Air Flight 117, everything felt frozen. A world once run by privilege and procedure had been overturned in a matter of minutes. Dr. Malcolm Reed stood. He did not raise his voice. He issued no orders. He simply stepped into the aisle, each slow, steady footfall, carrying the kind of authority that never needs to shout. "This flight," he said, his low voice carrying through the cabin, "is officially suspended until the investigation is complete." Captain Laura Bennett lowered her head, face drained of color. Beside her, Stephanie Cho clasped her hands, eyes wet. Noah Grant stared at the floor, his whole body taut. No one objected. No one dared. Malcolm turned to Sergeant Mark Alvarez, the security officer by the cabin door, who had witnessed everything. "Officer Alvarez, I need you to escort the entire crew off the aircraft. They are temporarily relieved of duty until we receive official instructions from CEO Erin Cole." Mark nodded. "Understood, sir." The word "sir" made the air grow heavier. Laura lifted her head to speak, but Malcolm raised a hand, a small gesture that seemed to halt the world. "No explanations, Captain," he said, the gentleness of his tone cutting cleanly through the air. "You had a chance to do the right thing, and you chose to trust bias over evidence." Laura swallowed. Her voice rasped. "Dr. Reed, I am truly sorry." "No." Malcolm shook his head. "Do not apologize to me. Apologize to the system you just defended, without meaning to the system that convinces people procedure can excuse any insult." He turned to Stephanie. She looked down as tears slid to the carpet. "I know I was wrong," she said, voice tight. "I just did not dare speak up." Malcolm nodded slowly. "I understand. Fear of losing a job keeps many people silent. But silence is still a choice, and today you must learn to take responsibility for that choice." Noah stood stunned. He was naturally quiet, but heat rose in his chest now. He wanted to say, "I am sorry," yet the words stuck in his throat. Malcolm looked at them one last time, then said softly, "Go. The crew will exit the cabin now." Mark signaled and stepped forward. Laura's hand trembled as she unpinned her captain's insignia. She placed it in Malcolm's palm, a silent surrender. He studied it for a long moment, not to humiliate her, but to remember power only matters when it is joined to conscience. As they filed out, Catherine Whitmore sat rigid in seat 2. B-face flushed. She gripped her handbag and stared out the window, clinging to the last shreds of pride. Malcolm approached. "Mrs. Whitmore." She did not look at him. "Mrs. Whitmore," he repeated, lower now, cooler. "You are permanently banned from flying on the entire Aurora Air Network." Catherine whipped around, fury blazing in her eyes. "You have no right. I am a long-time customer." "You have a right to fly." Malcolm cut in, "until you use that right to degrade others. From that moment on, it is no longer a right. It is a privilege revoked." She sprang up, shouting, "You are discriminating against me." Malcolm tilted his head with a faint smile. "No, ma'am. I am doing what this system should have done long ago, drawing a line between the decent and the toxic." Mark Alvarez stepped forward. "Ma'am, this way, please. You cannot throw me out like this. I will sue." Malcolm met her gaze. "You can sue. But before you do, watch the videos recorded by half this cabin. You will see that if justice were a film, you would be the antagonist." Catherine froze. Words failed her. Mark gently took her arm. "This way, ma'am." Her heels struck the carpet in hard, hollow beats, each step a nail driven into the coffin of pride. The cabin door closed. Only Malcolm remained, and a handful of passengers who had said nothing, watching in silence. He drew a long breath and turned to face them. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice unhurried, yet resonant. "I know what just happened has made everyone uneasy. But if you think this was only an incident, you are mistaken. It is a mirror. It shows how the world still works, quick to doubt others, slow to look inward." A woman in her middle years in row 4 raised a hand. Dr. Reed. "I did not speak, but I saw everything. I am sorry I stayed silent." Malcolm offered a small smile. "Thank you." Silence can be a fault, but recognizing it is the first step toward change. He looked around. "I do not want anyone leaving this cabin with a weight on their heart. I want you to understand that respect is not something we give because someone has power. It is something we owe each other because we are human." His eyes came to rest on Noah. The young attendant still bowed. Malcolm nodded. "You have a chance to become a better version of yourself than the one you were today. Do not waste it." Noah nodded, eyes rimmed red. "Yes, sir." Malcolm stepped to the front and lifted the small wall microphone, switching it to cabin-wide. His voice carried over the speakers. "Dear passengers, Aurora Air Flight 117 will temporarily stand down and change crews. You will be served again in 15 minutes. On behalf of the airline, I apologize for what happened, not because it was inconvenient, but because it reflects a deeper sickness in our society, the habit of staying silent in the face of injustice." When he finished, the cabin was still. No one applauded, but some lifted their heads, and their eyes were different. Stephanie reappeared at the door, lips trembling. "Dr. Reed, I know an apology is not enough, but thank you for a lesson I will never forget." Malcolm nodded. "Go. Start again from the truth." She bowed her head and left tears falling to the carpet. Outside sunlight washed the fuselage. The Aurora Air logo flashed bright as if the sky itself were witnessing a cleansing. Malcolm looked through the window. On the runway, Catherine Whitmore was being led away, her figure shrinking in the white glare. There was no gloating and no triumph, only a strange, quiet peace. He knew what he had done today was not to win, but to end a long chain of quiet losses that too many had endured. "This flight may be grounded," he whispered, "but dignity will keep flying." Outside, engineers checked systems and prepared for the new crew. Inside, the man in seat 2, A closed his eyes not to rest, but to map out the largest reform in the history of Aurora Air. Aurora Air Flight 117 sat still on the runway, like a steel bird halted mid-flight. But inside its first-class cabin, something was shifting, not the air, but the consciousness of everyone within it. 15 minutes later, the cabin door opened. A new crew entered uniforms, crisp steps, sharp and confident. Leading them was Captain David King, around 52 years old, tall, composed, with the steady eyes of someone who had logged thousands of hours in the sky. He stopped at row 2A and gave a respectful nod. "Dr. Reed, I'm David King. I'll be taking command of this flight in place of Captain Bennett." Malcolm stood and shook his hand. The handshake was firm, not between superior and subordinate, but between two people who understood that true respect always begins on equal ground. "Thank you, Captain King," Malcolm said. "I trust this flight will proceed, as it should, ordinary but dignified." David nodded. "You have my word, sir." Then he turned to direct his new crew. Every movement was fluid, professional, and without a single glance of curiosity or fear toward seat 2A. Gradually the cabin settled. Passengers leaned back in their seats, no one speaking loudly, no one daring to judge. The silence that filled the air was no longer cold. It was the stillness of awakening after a long sleep. Malcolm looked out the window. The sunlight slanted across the plane's silver wings, shimmering like a reminder that every journey deserves another chance to fly, as long as people are willing to change. He opened his laptop, not to write a report, but to record what had just happened. Across the screen appeared the title, "Walk a Mile, the Rebirth Project of Aurora Air." His fingers moved quickly, the words firm and clear. If a leader only sits in the front seat and gives orders, they will never understand how the back seat feels. If a company only trains employees to follow procedure, but not to act with humanity, then every procedure is meaningless. Aurora Air must change, not through termination, but through awareness. He paused, inhaled deeply. This was no longer a report about an incident. It was a declaration of a new system. Behind him, passengers whispered softly. Some glanced at him, with eyes that no longer held suspicion, but respect. The young woman in row 4, the one who had recorded the entire event, spoke quietly. "Dr. Reed, I posted the video. I didn't expect it to spread so fast. Everyone's talking about it online." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Thank you. Let them see, not to shame anyone, but to remind people that justice sometimes begins with something as small as standing your ground when the world tells you to move." The woman nodded, her eyes glistening. "I'll remember that." At that moment, Malcolm's phone vibrated. A message from Erin Cole, the operating CEO of Aurora Air, appeared on the screen. Marcus Phi saw the footage. "The entire board is in emergency session. I want to launch the Walk a Mile project immediately. 90 days of retraining for all flight crews. And you'll lead the program." Malcolm read the message and smiled softly. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, not to rest, but to feel the first motion of the gears of change. About an hour later, the plane took off. This time there were no judging looks, no condescending tones, only the steady hum of engines and the quiet peace everyone deserves to feel. Captain King emerged from the cockpit once the flight reached cruising altitude and walked to row 2 essay. "Dobisa, wososohossa." "Reed," he said, "on behalf of the entire team, I apologize for what happened this morning, not just as a captain, but as a human being." Malcolm looked up, his smile warmer than usual. "Thank you, Captain. I don't need an apology. I need a promise that it won't happen again." If everyone at Aurora Air understands that a passenger isn't a case to be handled, but a human being with a story, we'll never have to retrain customer service again. We'll just need to retrain humanity. David King nodded. "I understand. And I promise we will." When he left, Malcolm turned back to the window. The sky stretched wide, so blue it felt like it could wash away the morning's mistakes. He touched the captain's insignia Laura had left behind. The metal was cool against his palm, a symbol of authority, now resting in the hand of someone who understood its true meaning, that dignity doesn't live in a title but in how we treat others when we hold power. He placed the insignia in his pocket and resumed typing on his laptop. Aurora Air will implement the Walk a Mile program. Every quarter, executives and senior leaders will travel as regular passengers without revealing their identity. All flight crews, ground staff, and management will undergo 90 days of retraining focused on service ethics, fairness, and unconscious bias. Success will no longer be measured by speed or profit, but by how often passengers feel respected. He reread the final line and smiled. Beside him, the new flight attendant, Rachel Tran, about 30 of Asian descent, bowed slightly as she handed him a cup of coffee. "Black coffee, no sugar, correct?" Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "How did you know?" Rachel smiled. "I read it in your internal profile. But I'm not serving you because you're the CEO. I'm serving you because today you're my passenger." Malcolm chuckled and nodded. "Thank you. That's exactly why I still believe in Aurora Air." When the plane landed in Seattle, the afternoon sun poured golden light through the windows. Malcolm closed his laptop, stood, but didn't leave immediately. He turned to look at the first-class cabin, the same space that only hours ago had been a battlefield of prejudice. Now it was peaceful, orderly, as if nothing had happened. Yet in the air lingered something new, a collective awareness of respect. He knew what had unfolded. Today wouldn't end with this flight. It would ripple into boardrooms, training sessions, hiring decisions, and the simple way an employee said, "Thank you," or "I'm sorry." Because true change never begins with policy, it begins with awareness. He pulled his suitcase and stepped toward the exit. Captain King stood at the door and bowed his head. "I hope we have the honor of flying with you again, sir." Malcolm smiled. "If next time I board this flight and no one recognizes who I am, that will mean Aurora Air has truly succeeded." Outside, the evening sky reflected off the plane's silver wings, quiet, radiant, and clear like the dawn of a new beginning. 90 days later, the meeting room on the 48th floor of Aurora Air headquarters was bathed in the soft, golden light of late afternoon. Outside, the Seattle sky shimmered after the rain, reflecting on the glass walls like 1,000 mirrors, forcing the company to face its own image. Dr. Malcolm Reed sat at the head of the table. In front of him were 3 people, Captain Laura Bennett, Stephanie Cho, and Noah Grant. No uniforms, no traces of rank or power remained. Only 3 individuals who had walked through a long journey of facing themselves. Laura spoke first, her voice low but steady. "Dr. Reed, I can't change what happened. But over the past 90 days, I've learned that prejudice doesn't only live in thought, it hides in our eyes, in our decisions, even in the silences we believe are harmless." She took a small, worn notebook from her pocket. "This is my training journal. Each day I recorded a moment when I judged someone by their appearance. The results were worse than I imagined. But I'm still writing, so I never forget how blind I once was." Malcolm looked at her and nodded. In his eyes there was no anger, left only a quiet hope, fragile like a flame that had survived the storm. Stephanie spoke next, her voice trembling slightly. "I realized that in the moment I stayed silent, I chose the wrong side. I used to think that doing no harm was enough. But now I understand that silence in the face of wrong is also a form of participation." Then Noah, the young man, bowed deeply. "I once only wanted to keep my job, but now I want to keep my dignity. I promise to be the first to speak up, if it ever happens again." Malcolm stood and walked around the table, his voice low but warm. "I've read the reports, reviewed your training, and spoken to your instructors. I believe remorse is not proven by words, but by action. You've shown that." He stopped in front of Laura. "Starting today, you are reinstated, but only on domestic routes. You'll also lead a new training program, situational response and decision equity, for new pilots." Then he turned to Stephanie and Noah. "You two will return to work as well, but you'll rotate through every cabin-class economy business, and first so you can see the world from different perspectives. 6 months from now, I'll personally review your evaluations." All 3 said in unison, "Thank you, sir." Malcolm smiled gently. Don't thank me. Thank the opportunity this crisis has given us, because true justice doesn't lie in punishment, it lies in the human capacity to change. Outside sunlight reflected off the silver wings of an Aurora Air jet, taking off like a promise that from this day forward every flight would be guided not only by skill, but by compassion. 6 months later, the sky over Seattle was clear as glass. From the top floor of Aurora Air headquarters, Dr. Malcolm Reed stood silently watching a plane lift off the runway, leaving behind a thin white trail like a signature written across the heavens. Every time he saw that sight, he remembered Seat 2A, the moment that seemed small, but had opened an entirely new chapter for the world of aviation. Now Walk a Mile was no longer just a project, it had become the very soul of Aurora Air. Each quarter, executives and senior directors were required to fly incognito as regular passengers, recording their experiences and the changes that needed to be made. Those exchange journeys had made hundreds within the company cry, reflect, and grow. Captain Laura Bennett was now the lead instructor in the new pilot training program. Every one of her classes began with a single sentence. The day a passenger taught me what respect truly means was the day I truly became a pilot. Stephanie Cho and Noah Grant were now coordinators of the Passenger Voices Initiative, an internal network teaching employees how to listen and respond when they witnessed injustice. All three had changed, and together they became living proof that justice does not need to destroy anyone to be fulfilled. The video of Flight 117 still circulated across the internet, but what pleased Malcolm most wasn't the millions of views. It was the quiet stream of emails he received every day, messages from passengers who had once been mistreated from airline staff, learning to say "I'm sorry" instead of "that's policy," and from ordinary people who had found the courage to stand up when they saw someone being disrespected. One afternoon, Malcolm received a handwritten letter, signed Passenger 4B. It read, "That day I stayed silent. But because of you, I'm no longer afraid to speak. I realized that when I don't speak up, my silence becomes part of the wound." He folded the letter gently, a faint smile appearing on his lips. The story had traveled farther than he ever imagined. Malcolm gazed at the open sky, his voice echoing softly in his thoughts. Dignity is not something to be given. It must be kept defended and shared. If every person stood up just once when faced with what's wrong, the world would be forever changed. Outside Aurora Air Flight 117, now a symbol of justice and humanity, glided through the clouds, sunlight gleaming off its body, illuminating a new motto emblazoned on its side: Aurora Air dignity is not negotiable. And in Seat 2A, where it had all begun, the seat remained empty. Not because no one was worthy to sit there, but because it now stood as a reminder to the entire world that fairness begins with a seat and ends with the awakening of the human spirit. From the perspective of an expert in ethics and leadership culture, the story of Dr. Malcolm Reed is not just an incident on a flight, but a mirror reflecting how an entire system can lose its way when it forgets the most fundamental truth. Dignity is not a privilege, it is a human birthright. He chose not to retaliate, but to educate. He did not use power to punish, but to illuminate. And it was his calmness that made justice more convincing than any defense could ever be. Because sometimes changing the world does not require grand gestures. It only takes one person brave enough to stand still for what is right. If you believe that justice does not live in power, but in compassion, then press like to help spread that message. And subscribe to the channel to join us for more stories where respect takes flight. And before you leave, comment below with the simplest yet most powerful phrase of all: hold dignity.